warm welcome to our studio guests today and to fellow travelers out in cyberspace, thanks to that non-stop stream of zeros and ones. And of course, belated New Year's wishes from Team Zero in the Netherlands. My name is Peter Gobetz, co-founder of the Zero Project and moderator of the International Conference/Workshop on Zero. The Zero Project is a three-stage affair. There's a book project, an associated online event, and the in-depth research program to follow. But today, session number 12. And we welcome two more contributors to the Monograph on Zero book project, Dr. T.S. Ravishankar, former director of the Archaeological Survey of India in Mysore, and Dr. Solang UK, translator into Khmer of the popular book Finding Zero by the late Professor Amir Aczel. Solang collaborates closely with Mrs. Deborah Aczel and her daughter, Dr. Miriam Aczel, who are the co-organizers of this online event. So today we are privileged indeed to hear from two scholars closest to the earliest stone inscriptions of zero in history, in respectively Cambodia and India. We also welcome as panelists today Dr. Esti Eisenman, Hebrew University of Jerusalem, who last week told us about zero and the concept of nothingness in the Hebrew tradition. Dr. Kent Davis, PhD in physics with a career in industry, and Trevor Lawson, editor of Datasia, publishers of, among others, Solang Uk's translation of Finding Zero. Dr. Ravishankar, may we kindly invite you to briefly introduce yourself before launching into your talk, please.
Thank you, all. I'm Dr. T.S. Ravishankar, former Director Epigraphy, Archaeological Survey of India, Mysore. I've been in the field for nearly 3.5 decades. And after that also, post-retirement also, I'm continuing myself holding online classes and classes on epigraphy, paleography, and numismatics. So still I continue. I have a passion for teaching, and I'm extremely delighted I have been introduced, gave me a platform to speak on this occasion. So, belated New Year greetings to all. Hope the New Year augurs well for all of us, and Zero India project to take strides to make all-round progress in its research. At the prima facie, I wish to thank Dr. Robert Kuhn for giving me an opportunity to associate myself with this project and congratulate him for making this project very successful, work going on very successfully. And I wish to thank Dr. Peter Gobetz for inspiring and motivating me for writing an article and sending number of related articles connected with the subject from the day one. And Dr. Gisele Bedenbach for coordinating in this task. I also thank all the panelists and viewers. And the paper to be presented today is on the reflections on early dated inscriptions from South India. When Dr. Peter Gobetz approached me to talk about the subject, I was bit in a fix what to talk, what should be the subject I should look upon to do some work. Then to make a beginning, to make a humble beginning, I thought I should look upon some early dated inscriptions, especially from South India. Of course, there are number and hundreds and thousands of inscriptions reported, still coming to light from all over the Indian subcontinent. And India is very rich in epigraphical wealth, right from 3rd century BC, even little earlier, to late medieval period. We have hundreds and thousands of inscriptions belonging to different dynasties written in various scripts and languages. So, the subject which I have chose is not something very new. It's a beginning. I hope in days to come, we have to examine already some unpublished inscriptions and those inscriptions which are going to come in the course of time, especially the period between 4th century Common Era to 6th century Common Era forms a very, very important, because the transition which takes place, we want to push the antiquity of writing of zero in India to little early phase, which is, I hope, is possible, and I have taken this. So the study of transition from numeric system of writing to decimal system of writing, including the origin of zero, has engaged the attention of modern researchers. The subject is so vast, gripping, as well as baffling, it continues to attract the attention of scholars. There is no need to reiterate the fact that India is very rich in epigraphical wealth. Hundreds and thousands of inscriptions have been reported from the length and breadth of the country, written in various scripts and languages. Keeping the vastness of the subject in mind, an attempt is made to re-examine some of the early dated inscription that has come to light in the last few years, reported from archaeological excavations, from the epigraphical explorations, and also try to connect the hypothesis and views expressed earlier scholars. Since some probing was required to know the presence or availability of decimal system of writing and also zero from South India, a primary approach has been undertaken to review some of the already known dated inscriptions from Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Kerala, and Tamil Nadu. It's a matter of common understanding among the scholars that the use of decimal notations expressing the dates in Indian epigraph becomes almost a regular feature from 9th century Common Era in different parts of India. To recapitulate some of the earlier observations made on the subject, mention may be made of Mankani inscription of Tarlaswamin of the year 356, assignable to 595 Common Era. Since the record is spurious, it becomes untenable for us. Similarly, there are a couple of inscriptions cited to trace the beginning of decimal system of writing. One of the very significant inscription is from Ashrafpur, Dhaka district, now in Bangladesh, is cited to show the earliest presence of decimal system. Perhaps one of the earliest inscriptions cited by scholars is Mankuwar image inscription of Buddha, year 129. Another significant contribution in the area is made by Subrat Kumar Acharya, who has tried to explain the different phases of decimal notation that prevailed in Orissa, especially the transitional stages. Because of the large presence of dated early inscriptions from Andhra Pradesh, right from Satavahanas, and successive dynasty, prompted me to think they found their way into Orissa from Andhra Pradesh. And from Orissa, it went to West Bengal, Bangladesh, and further to Southeast Asian countries, from where inscription dated in early 7th century, Shaka era, 605, 606, and 608, as rightly remarked by Professor B.N. Mukherjee and Ajay Mitra Shastri. The occurrence of dates based on decimal notation as early as 7th to 8th centuries in Sanskrit inscription from Java, Bakul, Po Naga, Champa indicates that the areas from where the Indians had migrated to this region had adopted the decimal place value notation completely, and that immigrant adhere to this system religiously, and there can be no doubt on these observations. To cite some early inscriptions, Andhra Pradesh have taken in the recent years. Many dated inscriptions have come to light, One of the inscription is from Chebrolu, Guntur district. It is dated in regnal year 5, equivalent to 207 Common Era, belonging to the reign of Satavahana king Vijaya Satakarni. Excavations conducted in Panigiri, Nalgonda district has yielded a number of Prakrit and Sanskrit inscriptions. This inscription belongs to the reign of Ikshwaku king Rudrapursha Datta, year 18. Earlier year known was 11, but this inscription adds 7 more years to his reign. Apart from this, there are many dated inscriptions belonging to the reign of Ikshwaku rulers. So in Karnataka too, one of the earliest occurrence of numerical in Karnataka is found in a memorial pillar inscription dated that is 10,082 date, that is equivalent to work as 1005 Common Era. Is very interesting. It is from Vadagaon Madhavpur, Belgaum district. Among the dated early inscriptions, mention may be made of at least 6 inscriptions which are known from Kanaganalli, Sanati, Gulbarga district, belonging to different Satavahana rulers, dated in the 16th year of Sri Chimuka Satavahana, Sri Pulumavi, 35th regnal year, Vasishti Putra Sri Satakarni, 5th year, so on and so forth. And from Kerala too, we have some early Brahmi inscriptions are reported, but use of numerals are not found. And in Tamil Nadu, mention may be made of a well-preserved pottery inscription from Alangakulam with only one numeral, fairly large sign by Airavata Mahadevan. It is dated to 1st and 2nd century Common Era. The number is read as 408. And the first digit looks across the symbol for 4 followed by the symbol for 8 is insist in reverse direction. Further, he states that since there is no accompanying text, the exact significance of the number could not be understood. However, this is a unique and important discovery. In subsequent period, we don't find usage of early Brahmi numerals. Above, some important data inscriptions are highlighted. Only some concept of the above numerals used in South India known from different regions. Though at present there are no inscriptions to cite the earliest use of decimals and the use of zero, future epigraphical explorations may yield some inscription with decimal notation. Since there are number of dated inscriptions from Andhra Pradesh belonging to different dynasty may yield some inscription belonging to transitional phase. This I would like to emphasize here, as we have our Suprat Kumar Acharya could examine and brought to our notice some transitional phase. And I think we can, if we closely examine some of the dated inscriptions that are reported to earlier period, I think we may find some link, some clue which might have traveled to the Orison region. And other than the dated inscriptions, we find the use of the uh, numerals are found in different contexts also. Use of numerals in early inscription other than the date. While examining some of the early dated inscription, I came across some of the inscription using numeral symbols in various contexts. One of the unique inscription is of the Naganika. It's a very, very unique inscription belong to early phase, where it records various gifts, honorarium given for the performance of various sacrifices. The Gudnapur inscription of Ravi Verma, again, we find the use of numerals while giving account of grants made for worship and maintenance of Kama Jinalaya by the king, where numbers running 1 to 9 have been used starting in lines of the inscription 18 to 22, the inscription. Mattepadu plates of Damodar Varman is quite interesting to note, as the right inscribed face are consequently looking like the pages of a modern book with numeral symbols from 2 to 8 on the left side of the margin. And another aspect which attracted my attention while examining the inscriptions, though doesn't belong to the southern region, uh, the symbol for numeral 20 and the 0. It may not be out of place if we mention here. There is every possibility that the symbol of for 20, which is nothing but 0 with minor variations, might have influenced in the process of transition and entered the decimal scheme of notation. It may be noted here how Dr. D.C. Sarkar was tempted to read the date 10009, that is 109. However, it was not accepted as a 0 but as 20. Otherwise, this would have been the earliest instance for use of 0. Because of the spuriousness of the record, it could not be accepted. And the main thing, which many scholars have touched upon, is about the Buxley manuscript. Subjecting the Buxley manuscript carbon 14 date and assigning an anterior date has triggered a lot of controversies, speculations, and debate among scholarly world. Two sections are involved in this: the mathematicians on one end and the epigraphists, the paleographers, on the other side. The crux of the issue is the appearance of numerals, particularly 0. It's but natural this has generated curiosity among both the mathematicians and paleographers, since long scholars Hornell have discussed and also given earlier date, which does not augur well with the paleography of the manuscript. Scholars like Professor B.N. Mukherjee, Professor Ajay Mitra Shastri have assigned a later date, could be 7th and 8th century Common Era. Keeping in mind the paleography of the script, I too got an opportunity to re-examine the photographs appeared in different media and some published articles, and this makes me fully convinced that they belong to a period of 8th century Common Era than the earlier date claimed by the mathematicians. Two issues are involved here. First is carbon 14 dating, which doesn't stand the scrutiny of calligraphy, and second, the script of the manuscripts. What may be presumed is they might have used century-old palm leaves kept, and then they would have this. Hence, the script numbers and all belong to a later period of 8th century Common Era. To conclude, a brief review of some of the dated inscriptions having numeral symbols known from Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Kerala, and Tamil Nadu present different scenario at different places under different time zones. One thing is certain, they all followed a uniform pattern representing numeral symbols with minor variations almost followed in the entire subcontinent. The study further revealed that the inscriptions known from Andhra Pradesh, from Satavahana and successive dynasties, continued the trend of employing numerical symbols to express the regalia and sometimes in words too in most of their inscription, which is not to be seen in inscriptions known from Kannada, Karnataka, as well as from Tamil Nadu. Scholars like S.K. Acharya have made a detailed study of the inscriptions known from Orissa in a very detailed and descriptive manner to establish the transitional phase of numerals to decimal system of writing. Early dated inscriptions reported from Andhra Pradesh gives the necessary backdrop to understand the appropriate development of numerical symbols in continuity. Perhaps from Orissa, it continued its influence in West Bengal and then Bangladesh, and further it might have traveled to Southeast Asia through Indian migrant and where the inscriptions were written in Shaka era. This is a point to be noted. Shakaira was quite popular in southern India and it diffused to the other parts of the eastern direction. So it is from this region the Shakaira has gone. Though we have large number of later inscriptions reported from Cambodia and all dated in Shakara, of course in chronogram and words it is there. So it's a point to be noted that Shakara it is indigenous, which is from India, all along the coastal belt. It traveled to the Orissa through Andhra Pradesh, the coastal area of Orissa, and then Dhaka, Bengal, and then to the Southeast Asian countries. I would like to reiterate the fact that which scholars have already opined that through Indian only decimal travel to Southeast Asia along with zero. At present, with the available new inscription, it could not be possible said with certainty when exactly zero occurred in Indian from South India. However, future epigraphical explorations may hold the key for further usage of zero. So, with this, I would like to conclude, and my crux is that we have to examine. We have done a spade work in this direction, but especially those dated inscriptions ranging from 4th to 6th century, if we try to examine some unpublished stamp pages, inscriptions are available, a detailed, a thorough examination need to be done so that we may try to push the antiquity of zero. Of course, this is only an attempt. Hope in days to come, in years to come, we will definitely find a solution to this. And I thank again the organizers, this Zero India Foundation, for giving me an opportunity to express my thoughts. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ravishankar. Thank you very much. This really bodes well for future research, which is what we're driving at. A lot of this information has been known and debated without being conclusive in any way. And yet, to our knowledge, no one has suggested that targeted research should be done to get more clarity about this, since there is considerable controversy. You mentioned the Bakhshali manuscript for one and others. So we really appreciate, closer to the source we can't come at this stage, thanks to you. And we look forward to, fruitful cooperation in future to be able to, as you say, push back the date, the earliest date that is known. So thank you very much. I will now invite Solang UK.
Thank you very much.
Most welcome. Solang, may we invite you then to briefly introduce yourself and to tell us about Professor Amir Aczel's very important work in finding zero.
Shall I start now? My name is Solang UK. I'm a retired biologist. That's about all I could say about myself. But first, I would like to thank Deborah Aczel and Dr. Miriam Aczel and the Amir Aczel Foundation for bringing me into this business of nothingness, known in Sanskrit as sunyata. I like to talk just about the stone that was discovered in the eastern bank of the Mekong River called K127, which bear what supposedly to be one of the oldest numeral zero in the world. There's no doubt that as Dr. Ravishankar mentioned, the whole Southeast Asia was influenced by the Indian culture from very early on, as the famous epigraphist, French famous epigraphist George Sedas said that in the United States of Southeast Asia. But so the origin of the Southeast Asian culture is from India. There's no question about it. But before I go into any further, I would like to say, despite the fact that Cambodia got the culture from India, their counting system in the pre-Angkor area, which is in the 6th century onward, is slightly different from the rest of the other people. The old Khmer counting system was based on base 5, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then based on 10 plus 1, 10 plus 2, and so on. And then there's a 20 base also, based on 20. And then when they're up to 100, they borrow from Sanskrit. 100, they use the word sata, and 1,000, they use the word sahasra. But at the same time, there's another counting system that the traders use to sell mangoes or eggs and so on. There, nobody, even the system is still used today. No Cambodian would buy 5 mangoes or 7 eggs. They will all buy in 4, a lot of 4. We call that dambar. It's a unit of 4. So 1 dambar is 4, 2 P dambar is 2 times 4, and so on. And that is still, as I say, still used today. And then there is the word plone, which is 10 times the bar, which is 40. And then slug, 100 times the bar, which is 400. And this system is still in use today. But then at the same time, on the base 10, they use also the system of place holding, like the decimal place holding system, where 0 come in. So now I'd like to go to discuss briefly where is this 0 on the stone stele called K127. This was discovered in 1891 by a French governor in the eastern bank of the Mekong. It was in an old engraved door jamb in the pre-Angkor period. And as you can see here on the line 3 from above, there's a 0 dot in. So this was then brought back to Phnom Penh and put in the museum in Phnom Penh. And in the 1920s, the museum in Phnom Penh bought it for 100 piastre and put it in the museum in Phnom Penh. But during the 1960s, because of the civil war in Cambodia, the government then moved it to keep in a safe place in Siem Reap, what you call Angkor Conservation warehouse. And then the war, the Khmer Rouge occupied Cambodia and so on, and it destroyed a lot of old artifacts and so on. So nobody knows what happened to K127. They thought it was lost until Professor Amir Aczel, the American mathematical professor who is in his search of the origin of number, he eventually finds it in the warehouse of the Angkor Conservation and brought it back to Phnom Penh and so on. But why as sorry, I'm a bit as shown in that thing, the system used that time on that stone stele is a decimal system with a place holding concept on it. So this is what happened, and we think is in that stone concept, the inscription was in Old Khmer. That's another thing I like to say. Because of the influence of India, the language used at that time during pre-Angkor period, the 6th century to the 12th, and then Angkor period to the 12th century, all the government language and the elite, the royal family and so on, used Sanskrit. And a lot of stone inscription were in Sanskrit. But the local people who are not well versed in Sanskrit required also some native language in Khmer, in Old Khmer. So there are some inscription where they do written in Old Khmer, and this is what happened to K127. It was written in Old Khmer, so that people can date use the number to date events such as installation of founding stone of religious building and so on. So this was written in Old Khmer. Why does it have a number? There are also a lot of inscription in Sanskrit, but in Sanskrit, like Aryabhata and Brahmagupta in the 6th to 7th century, who wrote a lot of mathematics and astronomy, they wrote in they wrote it in rhyme. So they have to follow the strict rule of poetry for rhymes. Then they cannot use symbol for numbers because that you cannot have rhymes. So they use word symbols to represent the various number. For example, for 0, they use the word space or sky or wind, and so on. And for number 2, they use the word ice. For number 1, they use the word body, and so on. Therefore, they have no need to put numeral in shape as it would be used. And we look in the literature, the Ashoka era, there's only numeral from 1 to 9. There was no 0 in either. So then, as the people who did writing on the stele K127, they read it and they wrote it in a local Cambodian Khmer language that time. So they need some representation of numeral. That is why we have this year 604 of the Saka year, and the stone was broken, destroyed some words, so they can only get mentioned. The Saka era 604, which is equivalent to 682, 83 AD. This number is 200 years earlier than the recognized Indian oldest numeral written on the wall of Chattabooch temple in Gwalior city in 1876. So it is roughly 200 years older than that. But then there's a rival candidate to this date because of the Bakshali manuscript that is mentioned by Dr. Ravishankar. And the Oxford Borderline Library have done this carbon-14 dating of this Bakshali manuscript, and the date ranged from 3rd to 8th century AD. So this was immediately contested by various experts in Indian history or mathematics. Most prominently is Professor Hayashi, who wrote a thesis on Bakshali manuscript. And he said that paleogeographic study, the language at that time, and so on, he dated that it be around 8th to 9th century AD, which is also mentioned by Dr. Ravishankar. So then we don't hear anything more from Oxford Borderline Library anymore after the people published, they want to contradict that idea. Therefore, it remains today K127, that is at the moment still remain as one of the oldest 0 on record. So I think that is what I would like to say. But I would like to make correction whether Kevin agreed to this or not. There was a confusion about who is the publisher and who is Dr. Trevor Lawson. Dr. Trevor Lawson is a graduate physicist, but Mr. Ken Davis is the publisher of .asia.us. So that is what I like how to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Solang. Thank you very much. If there is some confusion from this side, then, like you said, Kevin will make amends. Your presentation is really supplementary to what Dr. Ravishankar has said about the long history of zero and numerals in India, and you basically don't argue with that. What you're saying is that there may have been some instance of innovation which is specifically Cambodian in introducing this .0. You didn't elaborate on it, but it's a very interesting point that that if the Bakhshali is not as early as they say, or not the earliest date, then the .0 may have been innovated in Cambodia. So that's a very interesting point to be contested, again, only by doing further research and not just simply speculating. So thank you again. What I would now ask is if Dr. Ravishankar has any questions of Solang UK. If you could please ask those questions now, and the other way around, when Dr. Ravishankar has finished asking Solang questions, then Solang, you can ask Dr. Ravishankar some questions. Please, Dr. Ravishankar.
Thank you. I thank Dr. Solang for his excellent presentation. As he rightly said, till further probe is made, it stands. And I wish to know, why didn't they continue the inscriptions? Suppose we take that the earliest. And are there any inscriptions dated in 7th, 8th or further period? Because later inscriptions are reported from Cambodia or many countries. I think they go, of course, with the dating in words, like chronogram, or they are dated in words. But why there is a gap? Is there any continuity in that what we see, this stele, what you have mentioned? Are there any further inscription, dated inscriptions in numerals, or dating Shaka as such in further period? I want to know, is that after that, are there any inscriptions from that in continuity to see? Because we get later period, or 10th or 9th or further period, 10th century onwards perhaps. Why there is a gap? There is a hiatus in this. Can you just throw light on this aspect, sir?
Solang, please.
There are inscriptions. There's a lot of stone inscription, hundreds of them in Cambodia. A lot, as they say, to use the Sanskrit. Then it is in rhyme, in poetry. And there are, I don't have to book it, there are numbers, but they are also written in my number, but they don't. For example, it is 554 Saka. They have no zero in it. So the answer is that only K127 bears zero. Does that answer your question?
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other further questions, Dr. Ravishankar?
No, sir. This I wish to know because it's focused on this. So I wish to know, that's what I intend to know. whether we get in continuity, dated inscription, but he is telling without the mention of zero, there are dated inscriptions.
Right.
So the continuity is kept up. I think that's why I intend to know,
Right.
because I have seen inscriptions, of course, mostly in written in words, the date portion belonging to later period like 10th or 11th century or 12th century. But I just wish to know, are there any early inscriptions? Preferably
Well-
Shaka, of course, known, but dated inscriptions I wanted to know, which he mentioned.
Well, I
Yeah.
can.
Excuse me, I got into. As you mentioned, there is in Southeast Asia, there's also zero is slightly a difference. It's not a dot in Champa, and in Indonesia also there's a zero, which is 1 year younger than the Khmer 0604. Uh, in in Indonesia also there is. So somehow the Southeast Asian student of India can create proof of zero on the stone, but not in India. You agree on that?
Okay, yes, sir. Yes.
Well, let me just add then, since we are collaborating closely with the Amir Aczel Foundation, that the intention down the line, just as we are doing, as the objective of the Zero Project, is that they would also like to do further research in Cambodia, because for various reasons this has not really been done meticulously, and so we are hoping that with the impetus that we're hopefully generating, that eventually such research as you are doing in South India will also be done in Cambodia, and we will come to know more about the travels, exact transmission of zero from India to Southeast Asia and what other manifestations there may be. So thank you. Solang, did you have any questions for Dr. Ravishankar?
No, at the moment I only say why if we will agree that why Southeast Asia, India, Champa and Indonesia have their zero except India.
Yeah. Right. That's one of the riddles that we hope to solve. We also want to keep the presentation compact to no more than an hour. We don't want to, we've been told we should not try viewers' patience, even though it's very educational, I must say, and interesting. So let's now go to the panelists and see whether the panelists may have any questions for the speakers. And I must qualify our invitation. You know, we are trying to get panelists from an interdisciplinary, say, fields, contiguous fields that may or may not even be closely related to that of the speakers, precisely because we want to avoid the kind of tunnel vision that has predominated this whole study, where only supposed experts bat these issues around and not even suggest future research, but simply keep speculating or building on the available evidence. So that's why we asked Dr. S.T. Eisenman from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, who gave a wonderful presentation last Sunday, about the zero in the Jewish tradition and the concept, which we Solang touched briefly on it, that Amir Aczel piqued his interest in the underlying philosophy of shunyata. Dr. S.T. Eisenman also delved into that from the Hebrew perspective to see what was the underlying concept that may have played a role in the invention of zero. So, S.T., thank you for accepting the invitation under a little bit of duress. Appreciate it very much. From your perspective and your training, are there any questions that arise after having heard these two presentations?
No, I don't have a lot of questions. It was very interesting to hear the presentations. I was interested a bit in the counting with the 4. Just it has nothing to do with my field of research, but Dr. Solang spoke about the counting with the 4 that is still today in use. So if you can tell a bit more about it, it was very interesting.
As I said, the Cambodian has a very strange way, different from other people in counting. And this lot of 4, it now is still used only with the traders who sells mangoes or eggs or the other fruits and so on.
But why 4?
It's unit of 4. As I say, the Cambodian would not buy five mangoes. They would not buy 3 or 5 mangoes. And the seller will say, okay, this is a number 4, or then P number 8, and so on. I don't know why, and it's still used today.
What interested me is that in Hebrew, the word for 4, when you count 4, it's the same word or a very similar word to the word of lot. So 4 is like, it's the same word, it's a synonym of the word a lot. So when you spoke about the 4, I just thought about it. And also, I'm interested in the Soniata and the connection with physics and void and all of this, and creation ex nihilo. Is there any connection with the Soniata and these ideas?
You ask me? No.
Yes, I'm asking you.
Sunyata means emptiness, but which is full of other thing is not empty at all.
So there's no connection to the void in physics or to the concept of creation ex nihilo? No connection?
I don't know because I'm a biologist, but as I say, it doesn't, to me, it doesn't seem to be related to the Sanskrit or and by the way, I just watched the Royal Institution the other day about the I forgot what it was. Anyway, the vacuum. It's not a vacuum. It's full of stuff in there. So this may be related to Sunyata. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
So if I can jump in momentarily, Solang, is it also not a fact that along with Indian culture, both Hinduism as well as Buddhism held sway in Cambodia during that period, and that as we are trying to explore in India, and particularly by Dr. Alexis Lavie, who gave a wonderful explanation about how the underlying philosophy of Shunyata, which was predominant precisely in the period that 0 as a number started coming up, he rationalized what you touched on, namely it can be empty, it can be full. In other words, it's basically, it could be a symbolic for the placeholder. The place could be empty, or the place could be occupied by any other number. So it's not, there is some, it's intuitive, but there is some connection there between opening up the concept of nothingness to the broader sense of potentiality, vacancy. It's not the kind of concept of nothingness that held sway in Europe later, that was transmitted into concepts like nihilism. They say a negative connotation of nothingness. It was a very pregnant concept of emptiness and fullness. You could not have one without the other. So I can imagine, in answer to ST's question, I don't know, again, further research has to be done, but if such a philosophy holds sway in a place and it coincides with innovation in other fields, for example, in mathematics or physics or whatever field, that it would be conducive to innovating such a novel concept. Whereas if that was not the case, if there was a negative connotation and you would not like to explore the concept of nothingness, then that would be inhibiting to innovation and coming up with zero. And historically, it's a fact that, as far as we know to date, that zero was not invented in Europe. So that seems to be the rationale at this moment. It's absolutely not unquestioned or unanimous. But you're right. Those are the two central issues. By tracing the innovation of zero to its earliest phase, we may also find some connection between the various other cultural antecedents that could have played a role in its invention. And that's what we're after, how to explain that for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, there were numbers from 1 to whatever, but no zero, and then zero pops up. So that's the enigma that we're trying to tackle. What was it that facilitated this invention? But enough said. Ashley, thank you very much. I'd like to ask Kent and Trevor also to take a turn, even though, again, you disqualified yourselves as experts, but still, again, from the interdisciplinary field, from your own background, it'd be very interesting to hear your reaction to these presentations and any questions that you may have. Kent?
Yeah, I do have an observation and a two-part question. Solang brought up the idea that numbers were written as word symbols and represented that in astronomical investigations by the Khmer. That's a fascinating concept. I am a verbal person. I have no mathematical skills, and I'm glad that Solang corrected my misappropriated doctorate from Dr. Larson. I'm a verbal person. What my mind is lives behind me on these bookshelves. The idea that mathematical symbols and concepts could be represented more tangibly to non-mathematical people by verbal cues, that's fascinating. And you said that the word zero was represented by the concepts of space, sky, or wind, and these are integrated into Vedic traditions, Khmer traditions, the Apsara, the goddesses of the air and water, mist. That's a very fascinating thing. That's just an observation. My question, Dr. Ravishankar, very early in his presentation, talked about this idea of decimal notation. Again, I'm not a mathematician, but the idea that from that decimal point, adding nothing or zero to either side can infinitely increase the size or lack of size of an object or concept. That's very fascinating to me. I wonder, here are the two questions. First of all, when were fractions represented digitally, or first seen digitally? So for example, if I have, two pens, if I had four hands, I'd hold up 4 pens, so we could do the 4 counting technique. But 2 pens, well, half of these, the concept of half, I imagine has been around for a long time. I'll take half, you have the other half, there's 2 of us. But when was the concept of half first expressed as 0.5? So it was a precisely digital concept rather than a spatial concept with 2 objects. The second question is, where is, I mentioned earlier how you can infinitely increase the power from that decimal point just by adding 0. When is the first mathematical representation of not just 1 0, like in 506 AD, or 506 Saka? When is the first representation of a double 0 on either side of the decimal place? So new directions for investigation from a total layperson, but those are the questions that came to mind.
Great, wonderful. That's what we want. Dr. Ravishankar, any reply to those questions?
As far as the first, epigraphically speaking, I don't know. There is the represent half, maybe in later, in the course of description, what we find in inscription regarding certain benefactions or some transactions, the half, maybe might have been expressed in words. I don't know precisely to which inscription it comes, but there are such half, mentioned maybe in words in some of the inscriptions that it's not right now coming to me my mind. And as far as the double zero is concerned, only we have later period, 10th century onwards, 1008 or that occurs later period, not in the earlier phase. I think whatever I have examined, the occurrence of 20, I think perhaps maybe in the after the Gwalior inscription, what you mentioned, that double zero might started occurring in inscription, not in the earlier phase.
That's
What I intend to say.
That's very interesting. I must say, I mean, a very penetrating question, because it never occurred to me to even ask that at this stage. So that'll be something else to pursue, as you say. Kent, does that answer your question, or do you want to follow up?
Well, I just wanted to introduce the concept of the question, so I'm glad I was able to contribute another question.
From my knowledge, as far as I know, the decimal point was a fairly late introduction, and as far as I know, it was roughly in the it was popularized by a Dutchman, I'm happy to say, Simon Stephen, who lived in the 16th century. He popularized the then fairly new decimal system in Europe, in the Netherlands, and in the 17th century it was officially adopted. But he's credited with popularizing the use of the decimal point, but he didn't invent it. There was a lot of experimentation in notation, and this came up fairly late. So they think maybe it goes back to the 15th or 14th century that somebody thought of using a decimal point. Trevor, would you like to conclude this round of questions, please?
Yes, I have a question about the Bodleian Library's dating of, I think you called it, the Bakhshali manuscript. And it seemed to be a very wide range of possible dates. From memory, I think it was between the 2nd and the 6th or the 7th centuries. Has anybody gone back to the Bodleian to see why it is such a wide range of dates? Because normally with carbon-14 dating, you would expect it to be a much more a tighter range. And if there is a problem with the carbon-14 dating, are there any other alternative methods of dating this manuscript?
May I come in to that?
Please.
Because I think Peter also have tried to contact Bodleian's library, but there's no answer since then. Then even the Amir or the Amir Foundation, Deborah, also tried to contact, but they just do not reply. Professor Hayashi, who wrote the thesis at Brown University in 1989, if I remember correctly, he said the study of the language, paleography, and the writing, it must be dated around 8th to 9th century AD. and the floor of the C14 study in Baudelaire, they wash only the bits that's not on the writing. It's only the bit on the bark. So that's the criticism of the Baudelaire C14, right? And then since they have no reply ever since, so we just don't know the reason why
Right.
they didn't reply.
Dr. Ravishankar, any views?
Yeah,
Thank you.
I wish to add, in the course of my presentation, I don't know, it's a highly hypothetical. They might have stacked, the birch leaves or whatever material, and those, the carbon 14 dating, it's not dated on that. The older leaves, perhaps they have cut and kept, and at later point of time, they might have used. How it is generated, I don't know. It's one of the supposition that they might have used the leaves which were dated to earlier phase and started writing at a later phase. The date, I don't know the scientific process involved in the dating process, because you take a stylus and then either the process they write it. Whether it is dated on that the ink that is on that or on the leaf, I don't know the scientific thing involved in this. But one of the presumption, it might have been cut and kept, and later centuries, they might have used also. This is one of my thinking.
Trevor, does that answer your question?
Yes, one can only hope that at some future stage the Bodleian might be encouraged to open up a little bit more and do some further research.
Well, I'm happy to share with you a little bit of a scoop that, as Solang indicated, we have been in touch with the Bodleians since even before the carbon dating took place. That's how we learned that carbon dating was about to take place when we contacted them, and that was again in turn because somebody else had requested us to go after the Bodleian because of the importance of the Baghshali manuscript, which was uncertain at that time. There's the Bodleian is not unamenable. They're amenable to doing this, but it's a complicated situation of staffing and funding and other issues. And the person who was in charge, I won't mention any names here, but the person who was in charge has taken another position elsewhere and is not getting around to writing the update. So we're after them. We hope that they will. We have another offer from a different university that in lieu of Bodleian doing it, that they might be able to take up the challenge. So we have hope that we will find out more. One very, very obvious answer to some of the points that have been made here is simply, as other people have done, is to say that the Baghshali manuscript may itself be a copy of a copy of a copy. And so even though the Baghshali manuscript may be controversial or spurious, or however you want to explain it, there may have been other copies before that would date back. And if you go purely by the mathematical knowledge inside the Baghshali manuscript, it can be compared to other developments before and after in mathematics in India. And based on that, very early on, even in the first half of the 20th century, it was estimated that the content, the mathematical content, would have dated from the 2nd or 3rd century. So we're waiting to see whether we can get radiocarbon confirmation of that.
Could I get in that? Because I think Baudelaire's library will not let anybody touch that, because he says so so valuable and so fragile. They just lock it up and nobody can get hold of
Yeah.
that.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens with a little bit of coaxing. We're all well-intentioned.
Yeah.
I think they received a little bit of a shock from the intense criticism that it invited afterwards from very highly qualified academics across the world who wrote a critique of the Bodleian report. So perhaps over time, when the pressure mounts and the interest, basically we're talking about the advancement of science, and that should not be blocked for whatever understandable reasons that may be mentioned.
Yeah.
So let's
Sorry.
wait.
Could I just get in quickly my favorite joke about the zero, the Khmer zero? I think just like Sumerian, before they leave zeros in empty space. So the scribe wrote 6, empty 4. So we think that this we can get confused with 64. So we take a hard steel knife and just put a hammer onto it to make it 0.
It could have been something as innocuous as that. Let's see if it turns out to be a huge disappointment. But yeah, anything goes at this stage. So let's not speculate. Let's wait, and let's please move on now to the concluding phase of this program. Otherwise, we're really going to run over time. Dr. Ravishankar and Solang UK, we usually conclude these sessions with a brief survey. If you would just answer in a single sentence, okay? No elaborate explanations. Just simple sentence to the following 3 questions, and so in doing so, you'll be helping us to draft future research. Dr. Ravishankar, was the numeral 0 discovered or invented?
It's invented.
Okay, thank you. Solang, the numeral 0 as opposed to the placeholder, was the numeral 0 discovered or invented?
I think it is invented, but the concept is
Right. No, the concept would be probably more fundamental. Second question, the transition. Okay, we've had the placeholder for a long time, and then suddenly the numeral surfaces. The question is, was this transition from the placeholder to the numeral, was it gradual or was it disruptive? Was it a sudden event or was it something that gradually evolved? Dr. Ravishankar?
It's gradual.
Gradual.
As Subrat Kumar Acharya has tried to explain along with the Orison inscription, I would like to go for an earlier phase, and it is transitional only. It would not have come all of a sudden. Okay. So it's a transitional.
Okay, thank you. Solang, was the transition, was it a slow evolutionary, a gradual process, or disruptive moment?
To me, it's more of a disruptive. It's just somebody got a flash of idea and just put it on.
Right. Thank you. Then the final question. Now we're moving to what Esti alluded to and Solang in the beginning. This underlying concept of nothingness or emptiness, is it trivial or is it profound? Dr. Ravishankar.
It's profound.
Okay. Thank you. Solang?
It is profound, yes. Okay. I agree with Dr. Ravishankar.
Thank you very much. Now to our viewing audience also and our studio guests, thank you for joining us today. I mean, it's a Sunday afternoon, everybody's got other things to do, but you took the time and the trouble, and we really appreciate that. Now, please join us the week after next, then we will explore other issues that may be related to the invention of zero and to hopefully pinpoint the epicenter of zero. And then we will meet Professor C.C. Roy and Dr. Venkat Kosina on a novel approach that links very modern mathematical category theory to the philosophy of emptiness or shunyata that we've been discussing as we inch closer to zero's epicenter. So until then, thank you again and see you next week.